Thank you. Thank you very much. Your Majesty, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great honor, but also a pleasure to be here to discuss matters that are both important and urgent and need to really be discussed from many different perspectives. So thank you very much to the organizers for this event and for inviting me. I will be presenting what UNICEF has been doing in the area of AI with a policy guidance that was issued in 2021, so even before JPT, but I will also be discussing and wanting to engage in a conversation about updating that guidance, which seems to us extremely urgent. But before we do that, I would like to first talk a bit more, following the presentations that happened just before the coffee break, on what we know about children's experience with AI. First, this is some sneak peek on some of the results of long studies that we have been leading over the last 2 years, interviewing 8,000 children across 8 countries, the 8 countries that are listed on the slide here. And what we can clearly see is that children in all parts of the world, not only on the basis of these studies, but other studies that UNICEF has been leading, children all over the world are already using AI, and they are using in high proportion. And there's no country in the world where we don't have some children at least using AI of different ages, but we've been looking there at the 12 to 17. What we even, at the same time, know very little about is what children do with AI. And we have been seeking to look into that. And as you can see on the slide that is being shown here, they do use AI in many different ways. And now we're looking at how 5 to 8 years old have been using AI. And you find some really interesting things. They use AI to learn more about school-related material. They use AI to learn critical thinking skills. They use AI to learn more about AI. And that really indicates, I think, a lot of what we may not be doing as adults or caregivers or educationists. But you can also see that 10% of the, again, 5 to 8 years old have reported that they use AI to talk or text with a chat box, and very indicative of, therefore, big risks in terms of what children do there. So we must admit that we know very little in reality, and that when we hear about AI, it's often with very alarming messages, which are correct, like the emerging safety issues that we've been discussing this morning in particular. And in our study, we have seen, again, that's the 8,000 children interviewed in 8 different countries. We found that between 0.4 and 4.3% of the children reported that someone else had used AI to create fake sexual images or videos of them in the past year. And that's an alarming amount of children, in fact, and we, of course, know that we're only looking at the top of the iceberg. But we also know that this type of sexual abuse is rarely reported in the survey. It means that in total, across the 8 countries with available data, more than 300,000 children have been subjected to this in the past year alone. We're speaking of 2024. 300,000 children in 8 countries. That gives us a sense of the magnitude of the problem when we look globally. And of course, we know that financial sexual extortion is also being facilitated by AI, including by this deep fake. This is probably the most rapidly growing crime targeting children in different countries. We know of the phenomenon in places like the United States, Canada, and Australia. And while only a fraction of this is enabled by AI, we know that this is expected to increase. And there again, we also know that we know very little in a very large number of countries. So there's a number of issues, and they're even the most dramatic one, and we need to be taking this, this as something that was reported in the press with a lot of issues in not knowing the facts clearly about this case. But there has been allegations that, in fact, the relationship between teenagers in particular and chatbots is such that the question about that human-machine interaction is extremely sensitive, at least during childhood. And last month, only the Safety Commissioner issued an online safety advisory on AI chatbots and companions and the risk to children. And again, we're looking at teenagers. We don't know yet about the younger bracket of children, and we can only imagine a world that is probably not far away from us, where we will have AI chatbot nannies, for instance, not only companions and friends, but nannies even. Yet what we know is that children and teenagers and young people feel that they really are not consulted enough. Back in 2020, as a precursor to the policy guidance that I just mentioned was issued in 2021 by UNICEF, we had organized consultations on AI in a large number of countries. And what we heard in Brazil, like in many of the other countries, was really that sense by children and of young people that most of the technologies that exist are not made with children in mind. And that remains very much the message that we still hear today, and that Mariana, for instance, conveyed again this morning. So within that context, in 2021, UNICEF issued these policy guidance on AI for children. And it's interesting that it's not only on AI and children, but AI for children. And UNICEF is of course, placed in a good position to support and drive this agenda. And we've been really doing it consistently over the last few years. Again, as I just mentioned, this was even issued before ChatGPT came about. And we've been very aware that this is something that applies everywhere, but we're also acutely aware that this is an issue that should be driven from a child rights perspective as far as UNICEF is concerned. Why? Because child rights give us a really helpful framework to look at both maximizing the opportunities that we see with AI, for instance, in terms of education, while really not only minimizing, but limiting and stopping risks related to the use of AI and children. So it gives a very good sense of compass in terms of considering AI. And of course, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is, as Your Majesty reminded us this morning, the most ratified human rights treaty in the world. In fact, all but one country ratified or acceded to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It might be a bit tricky that that one country happened to be the place where a lot of the big companies are incorporated. That's, of course, something we need to take into consideration, but nevertheless, it provides a very helpful framework. UNICEF is also on the ground in many countries, in fact, in most of the 193 countries of the United Nations, and that gives us a chance of being able to get our really the pulse on what children and young people feel, and working closely with the education sector in terms of some of the opportunities. So that policy guidance issued in 2021 really was based on the child rights framework, but also was child-centered. And this is really just a quick capture of the main requirements that it provided, and the fact that it was indeed founded on upholding child rights. I left on the table here at the center of the room leaflets with the QR code where you can access this. The main issues that I'd like to very briefly mention here is that it provided for non-discrimination for children. And that's extremely important because if we look at the equitable access to AI, we need to make sure that the most vulnerable children are not left behind. That includes within each society in terms of some of the children that are very vulnerable for a number of reasons that can really range from socio-economic to sexual orientation to really a whole set of issues, migrant children, but also across the world, as we really see big issues in terms of access. And obviously, thinking of access to AI in places where you don't only have no connectivity, but not even electricity, seems to really be something that we need to address collectively. Among the other key issues in that policy guidelines is to ensure safety for children, calling for mechanisms for assessing and continuously monitoring the impact of AI systems on children in AI policies and strategies, and continuously assessing and monitoring the AI impact on children throughout the entire AI development life cycle. So you can see through these recommendations that we address not only states and parents and carers, but also companies. And we remain very actively involved in reaching out actively, but also being very much there for companies in engaging on how to develop products that are as safe as they can be for children. Another key consideration is that we are advocating for transparency, explainability, and accountability for children, including using age-appropriate language to describe AI. When there was a mention earlier of how difficult some of the legislations can be for adults to understand, then we have even a larger issues in terms of making sure that children themselves can understand what is there to protect them. Now, the guidance has, in fact, since 2021, been taken up by a number of the AI regulations and strategies that have been adopted since then. It's also been used for advocacy and in improving practices within companies that develop AI systems. And it's also been really something guiding civil societies and others to implement child-centered artificial intelligence. But we believe that the world evolved very fast, and in particular, the world of AI. And so we are seeking to update this guidance. And in fact, we are working on it and plan to have this updated guidance issued sometimes in the summer of this year. And so what I'd like to do is to very much encourage you to engage with what I'm going to very shortly present here, but also in the margin of these events, and very much to also in the coming weeks, let me know if you have comments and issues that you think we as UNICEF can address. We think we have a good window of opportunity in being able to reach globally and to really reach, again, governments, civil society actors, companies, and therefore are very keen to make the most of this opportunity and think that we can only achieve that if we do it together. We're updating this guidance for reasons that are obvious. Again, pre-ChatGPT seems to be an era ago. And there's so much that has been taking place, but also so much engagement on the part of children. A lot of guidelines, regulations have also been adopted since then, and we know a lot more about the impact that AI has, for instance, on the environment. So we need to update this guidance. And I'm just going to make some of the proposed recommendations. Again, this is very much draft and work in the making. But among the proposed recommendations, I'd like to list 4 or 5, actually. The first one is that we want to really very specifically and explicitly speak of the need to have the prevention of AI-enabled child sexual abuse and exploitation. And we really want to work on the prevention. There's so much that is taking place and has been discussed. It still is a world where there are far too much needs for further implementation and enforcement. I'm a former prosecutor myself, so I will certainly be calling for implementation and even accountability. But we also need to look at prevention, and in particular, when we look at AI-facilitated child sexual abuse and exploitation. We want to ensure that there is increased industry transparency and accountability, and look also at improving reporting and support mechanisms for survivors and strengthening the legal protections. These are a set of recommendations that we want to include. A second set is around mitigating the risks to children from AI-generated, disseminated, and amplified disinformation, scams, harmful and illegal content. I could really develop that for 15 minutes just on this, because we know so much and we know that there is also so much that we don't know, but clearly governments have to do a better work at protecting children from harmful content while respecting children's right to information and freedom of expression and their evolving capacities. This morning, there was a discussion on, and thank you very much, in fact, for looking at the new design guidance by Five Rights on looking at different stages of children. And this is very much at the heart of what we're seeking to do. In terms of child rights, we think of the evolving capacity of the child as something that means that as the child grows, the child is progressively less and less in need of protection and more in need of being unable to achieve her or his rights. And that evolving capacity is absolutely key in terms of looking at children by age categories, but also at individual children in terms of their need for protection, but also their need for being able to exercise their rights freely. And to us, this is a key as well, because we are seeing a world in which increasingly some categories of children, and in particular teenager girls, are facing an increasing narrowing of their capacity to have access to the information that they need, including, of course, education. So getting that right balance between protection and also access to information is absolutely key, while protecting children from AI-generated, AI-disseminated, and AI-amplified disinformation and misinformation. Next set of recommendations we would like to include is to mitigate risks from AI-enabled chatbots or companions. I referred earlier to the alleged suicide related to a child or a teenager engagement with chatbots. We know as well of chatbots that exist that help children that are grieving a loved one. And I think it poses fundamental questions for us as human beings as to where is it that we want to continue engaging with children and teenagers? When is it that we are ready to hand that over to machines that maybe at the same time as they provide support, create very strange types of dependencies? At least we don't know about this. And that seems to really be very concerning, that we will be ready to delegate this to machines without understanding the short-term, medium-term, and long-term consequences, but also that we know that some of those chatbots will be registering that information, and we don't have enough guarantees of the confidentiality, but also of the privacy of that information to really let children be really facing these machines. So the question of AI-enabled chatbots or companions, with all of what it may mean in terms of getting AI teachers, AI friends, AI babysitters, is something there where we need to really just pay clear attention and come on it, not only about the fact that it might be an easy or cheaper solution to get AI rather than training teachers, but is that really the solutions we want? And can we really expect that machines can be teaching a child how to learn to read on the basis of what was also presented this morning? We want to include recommendations around the ensuring a rights upholding AI supply chain, looking both at the upstream and downstream supply chain, including the mining of critical minerals that are needed to build chips, and making sure that even the security companies that secure the mine are really acting and not undermining children and not sending children, in fact, to mine these minerals. But also that the supply chains include the protection of data, including issues like copyrights and, for instance, the scanning the irises of the eyes, as I understand some companies have been doing in some countries with children. Last but not least, something which has not been mentioned since this morning, which I believe is something we also need to address: conflicts, armed conflicts and AI. This is really an area where possibly some of the fastest and possibly also most concerning developments are taking place. Obviously, as countries are competing, as the militaries of this world are competing, and as we see very intense geostrategic competition, we know that some of the keys in the way conflicts are already being fought and the way future conflicts are being prepared to be fought involve a lot of AI systems, not only with increasingly autonomous weapons, but also the increasing autonomization of the decision-making in coordinating a number of different systems. I'll take the example of drones. Now we're not facing one drone, but really swarms of drones. And the battles of the future will be fought this way, most probably, or at least weapons are being designed this way. And the military decision-making is increasingly about being faster than your opponent in coordinating a huge number of drones, not only flying, but also maritime or underwater. That is, in fact, some military analysts already say, beyond the capacity of human brain, but machines can do it in a much more effective way. What does that mean for the protection of children in conflict? And how will these increasingly fast and very multifaceted wars protect children? And in addition to this, there is, of course, something that we already see, which is in hybrid warfare, the fact that even far from the battlefields, there are an increasingly large number of cyber attacks that may be targeting and are, in fact, targeting not only military objectives, but also targeting hospitals, the internet itself, schools. How are we going to protect children from that perspective? So I think that this is not far-stretched, and that if we look at the protection of children in today's conflict, and especially moving forward, we need to pay more attention to this. So with this, just on a dot, I'm almost Swiss. Thank you very, very much.